You believe you know the secrets of success, that you've mastered the principles of the prosperous mind. Allow me to be direct. Everything you've learned so far represents only the most superficial layer of a far more complex reality. During decades of studying the human mind, I discovered patterns I never shared publicly. Not out of malice, but out of prudence. Certain truths about how our minds truly operate. Well, most people simply weren't prepared to comprehend them. Today I'm going to reveal one of these discoveries, a mental mechanism that operates in the shadows of every great achiever, including my own brain. Something that explains not only our successes, but also our deepest internal conflicts. If you feel you're ready for this level of understanding, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and comment, what would you do with knowledge that most people couldn't bear to hear? You've read Think and Grow Rich. You've memorized the 13 principles. You've visualized your desires with burning intensity. Yet here you are, still wondering why the magic hasn't happened for you, why your bank account remains stubbornly unchanged, why your dreams feel more distant than ever. What if I told you that Napoleon Hill deliberately concealed the most powerful element of his success formula? What if the real secret wasn't in what he taught, but in what he carefully omitted from his public teachings? There's a psychological mechanism so potent, so fundamentally transformative, that Hill himself called it the dark trick of the mind. He whispered about it only to his closest associates, those millionaires who funded his research. They understood what the masses could never handle. That true power comes not from positive thinking, but from something far more sophisticated and dangerous. Picture this. You're standing in a vast library, surrounded by thousands of success books. Each one promises you the golden key to wealth and achievement. You pull book after book from the shelves, consuming every word with desperate hunger, yet something nags at you, a feeling that you're missing something crucial. Like trying to solve a puzzle when someone has deliberately hidden the corner pieces. That nagging feeling, it's your subconscious mind recognizing that you've been fed half-truths wrapped in inspirational packaging. The wealthy elite have always known something that they've never shared with the general public. It's not about manifesting or visualizing or even taking massive action. Those are merely the surface ripples on a much deeper ocean. The real secret lies in understanding how to weaponize your mind's natural tendency towards self-sabotage. Think about it. Why do most people fail despite having access to the same information as those who succeed? Why do lottery winners often end up broke? Why do entrepreneurs with brilliant ideas watch their ventures crumble, while others with mediocre concepts build empires? The answer isn't in their actions, it's in their mental programming. More specifically, it's in their relationship with what Hill privately called the shadow frequency, a hidden wavelength of consciousness that most people never learn to tune into. Your brain operates on multiple frequencies simultaneously. Science has identified alpha, beta, theta, and delta waves, but there's another frequency that neuroscience hasn't officially recognized yet, a frequency that successful people unconsciously access when they're making their most crucial decisions. A frequency that allows them to see opportunities where others see obstacles, to remain calm when others panic, to persist when others surrender. Napoleon Hill discovered this frequency by accident during his interviews with Andrew Carnegie. He noticed that when Carnegie discussed his most successful ventures, something shifted in his demeanor. His voice took on a different quality. His eyes seemed to look through time itself. Carnegie wasn't just remembering past successes. He was accessing a mental state that ordinary people never experience. Hill spent years trying to understand what he had witnessed. He interviewed over 500 successful individuals looking for the same pattern. And he found it. Every single one of them, from Henry Ford to Thomas Edison, had learned to access this shadow frequency. Not through meditation or mystical practices, but through a specific mental technique that allowed them to bypass their conscious mind's limitations. The technique was so powerful that Hill feared what might happen if it fell into the wrong hands. He embedded clues throughout his writings, but never revealed the complete method. He knew that most people weren't ready for such responsibility, that they would use it carelessly, like children playing with dynamite. But you're different, aren't you? You felt the frustration of knowing there's more to success than what's commonly taught. You've sensed that beneath the surface of every rags-to-riches story lies a deeper truth. You've wondered why some people seem to have an almost supernatural ability to bend reality to their will. What you're about to discover will challenge everything you think you know about achievement and human potential. This isn't about positive thinking or goal setting or any of the other comfortable concepts that populate self-help shelves. This is about understanding the dark architecture of human consciousness and learning to navigate it like a master. Consider the predator in the wild. It doesn't succeed through hope or positive visualization. It succeeds through patience, precision, and an almost supernatural ability to read the invisible currents of its environment. It knows when to strike and when to wait. It understands that true power often lies in what you don't do, not what you do. The most successful humans operate with this same predatory awareness. They've learned to read the shadow frequency, to sense the hidden patterns that govern human behavior, to position themselves in alignment with forces that most people can't even perceive. This awareness begins with a fundamental shift in how you perceive failure and success. Most people see them as opposites. Winners understand they're two faces of the same coin. They know that every failure contains the genetic code of future success, and every success carries the seeds of potential failure. This paradoxical thinking allows them to navigate both experiences with equal grace and extract maximum value from each. Your conscious mind resists this paradox. It wants clear categories, simple answers, predictable outcomes. It's like a nervous passenger constantly asking, "Are we there yet?" But your subconscious mind thrives in paradox. It understands that the most powerful truths are often contradictory on the surface, yet unified at a deeper level. The shadow frequency exists in this paradoxical space. It's the mental wavelength where contradiction dissolves into clarity, where opposing forces merge into unstoppable momentum, where your deepest fears transform into your greatest strengths. Napoleon Hill knew that accessing this frequency required more than intellectual understanding. It demanded a willingness to descend into the darker territories of your own psyche, to confront the parts of yourself that you've spent your entire life trying to avoid. Most people flee from this confrontation. They prefer the comfortable delusion of surface-level solutions, but you can't build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. You can't achieve extraordinary results while remaining an ordinary person. The transformation that leads to genuine success is never comfortable, never easy, never safe. It requires you to become someone that your current self might not even recognize. This is why Hill called it the dark trick, not because it's evil or harmful, but because it requires you to work with the shadow aspects of your personality, the parts that society taught you to suppress. The hungers, the rage, the relentless ambition that polite people learn to disguise. Successful people don't suppress these energies, they harness them. They understand that their darkest impulses, when properly channeled, become their most powerful assets. Their impatience becomes urgency. Their anger becomes determination. Their fear becomes wisdom. Your brain is constantly monitoring your environment for threats and opportunities. But most of this monitoring happens below the level of conscious awareness. You're like a radio receiver that's only tuned to one station while dozens of other signals flow around you undetected. Learning to access the shadow frequency is learning to tune into these hidden channels of information. When you begin to operate from this deeper awareness, you'll notice that your relationship with time changes. Minutes feel like hours when you're bored, and hours feel like minutes when you're engaged. But on the shadow frequency, time becomes fluid. You develop an intuitive sense of timing that allows you to act when action will be most effective and to wait when waiting serves your higher purpose. You'll also notice that your relationship with other people transforms. Instead of reacting to their words and actions, you begin to sense the deeper currents that drive their behavior. You become like a skilled chess player who can see several moves ahead, not through analysis but through intuitive pattern recognition. This heightened awareness extends to opportunities as well. What most people experience as lucky breaks, you'll recognize as the natural result of being positioned correctly when the invisible tides of circumstance shift. You'll develop what seems like supernatural timing, showing up at exactly the right place at exactly the right moment. But perhaps most importantly, you'll discover that your internal dialogue changes. Instead of the constant chatter of doubt and second-guessing that plagues most minds, you'll develop an inner quiet that allows you to hear the subtle whispers of your intuitive intelligence. This inner voice doesn't speak in words but in knowings, in sudden clarity, in unshakable certainty. The path to accessing this state begins with recognizing that your current level of consciousness, no matter how sophisticated it might seem, is actually quite primitive. You're operating with the mental equivalent of a stone axe while nuclear technology exists. The question isn't whether you can upgrade your mental operating system. The question is whether you're willing to do what it takes. Most people spend their entire lives running from their own power. They've been conditioned to believe that extraordinary achievement requires extraordinary talent, exceptional circumstances, or divine intervention. They don't realize that the capacity for greatness already exists within their neural architecture, waiting to be activated by someone brave enough to explore the deeper territories of human potential. The wealthy understand this. They know that the difference between poverty and prosperity isn't in external circumstances, but in internal awareness. They've learned to think like predators, while others think like prey. They've learned to see patterns while others see only chaos. They've learned to act with certainty while others hesitate in confusion. But this knowledge comes with a price. Once you begin to see how reality actually works, you can never go back to comforting illusions. Once you understand the true nature of success and failure, you become responsible for your results in a way that most people can't even imagine. There's no one left to blame, no external circumstances to use as excuses, no cosmic forces to petition for help. This responsibility terrifies most people. They prefer the familiar prison of limitation to the unfamiliar territory of unlimited potential. They choose the known suffering of mediocrity over the unknown challenges of greatness. You're reading these words because something inside you refuses to accept that choice. Something in your core knows that you're capable of far more than your current results suggest. Something whispers that there's a level of awareness and achievement that you haven't even begun to explore. That whisper is your shadow frequency trying to make contact. It's the part of you that knows the truth about human potential, the part that remembers what you were before society taught you to be small, the part that recognizes that everything you've been told about success might be a carefully constructed lie. Napoleon Hill heard that whisper during his conversations with the industrial titans of his era. He recognized it as the common thread that connected every person who had achieved something extraordinary. And he spent the rest of his life trying to decode its message without revealing its most dangerous secrets. What he discovered was that human consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously. The surface level is where most people live, reactive, emotional, driven by external circumstances. But beneath this surface lies a deeper intelligence that operates according to entirely different principles. This deeper intelligence doesn't think in linear time. It perceives past, present, and future as a single flowing continuum. It doesn't separate self from environment, but recognizes the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. It doesn't struggle against resistance, but finds ways to transform opposition into assistance. When you learn to access this deeper level of awareness, you begin to operate from what Hill called the master frequency. Decisions that would torment ordinary minds for weeks become instantly clear. Obstacles that would stop most people become stepping stones. Setbacks that would crush others become valuable course corrections. But accessing this frequency requires more than intellectual understanding. It demands a fundamental rewiring of your neural pathways, a death and rebirth of your identity, a willingness to become someone that your current circle of friends and family might not recognize. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a gradual process of dissolving old patterns and installing new ones. It's like learning to see color after a lifetime of viewing the world in black and white. The capacity was always there, but it had to be awakened through specific practices and sustained attention. The process begins with recognizing that your current personality is largely a collection of unconscious reactions programmed by past experiences. You think you're making conscious choices, but most of your decisions are actually automatic responses triggered by environmental stimuli. You're like a sophisticated computer running software you didn't choose and can't consciously access. The first step toward freedom is becoming aware of this programming, not judging it or trying to change it immediately, but simply observing it with detached curiosity. This observation creates space between stimulus and response, between trigger and reaction, between circumstance and choice. In that space lies your power. In that gap between what happens to you and how you respond lies the seed of every transformation you'll ever experience. Most people live their entire lives without ever discovering this space exists. They remain prisoners of their conditioning, slaves to their unconscious programming, victims of circumstances they could easily transform if they knew how. But you're about to learn how. You're about to discover what Napoleon Hill and the other giants of achievement understood about the hidden architecture of human consciousness. You're about to access a level of awareness that will make your current problems seem trivial and your current limitations seem laughable. The journey begins with a simple question. What if everything you think you know about success is designed to keep you trapped in mediocrity? What if the real secret to extraordinary achievement lies not in doing more, but in becoming more? What if the answer you've been seeking isn't in another book or seminar or strategy, but in learning to think like someone who already possesses everything you desire? Imagine a world where you could predict the outcome of any decision before you made it, where you could sense opportunity approaching while others remained oblivious, where you could maintain perfect calm in the midst of chaos and act with unwavering confidence even when the future seemed uncertain. That world exists. That capacity lies dormant within your neural architecture right now, and you're about to learn how to awaken it. Look around you. What do you see? Millions of people scrolling through their phones, desperately consuming motivational quotes and success stories, yet remaining exactly where they were yesterday. They share posts about grinding and hustling. They attend seminars and workshops. They buy course after course, program after program, each one promising to be the final piece of the puzzle. But nothing changes. Nothing ever really changes. They remain trapped in the same cycles, fighting the same battles, experiencing the same frustrations month after month, year after year. They blame the economy, their background, their lack of opportunities, their bad luck. They blame everyone and everything except the one factor they actually control: their own level of consciousness. This is what happens when people mistake information for transformation. They collect success principles like Pokemon cards, thinking that accumulation equals application. They memorize quotes from millionaires while living paycheck to paycheck. They talk about manifestation while manifesting the same mediocre results they've always produced. You see it everywhere. The friend who reads every business book but never starts a business. The colleague who attends every networking event but never builds meaningful relationships. The family member who talks constantly about their dreams but takes no concrete action toward achieving them. They're all running on the surface frequency, the one that operates through hope and external validation. They've never learned to access the deeper wavelengths where real transformation occurs. They don't even know these frequencies exist. Most people approach success like they're trying to tune into a radio station with a broken antenna. They pick up fragments of the signal, a motivational speech here, an inspiring story there, but they never get clear reception. They never hear the complete message because they don't know how to position themselves correctly. The tragedy isn't that they lack potential. The tragedy is that they've been programmed to access only a tiny fraction of their mental capabilities. It's like trying to power a skyscraper with a bicycle dynamo. The energy is there, but the connection is all wrong. Consider the story of Marcus, a composite of dozens of people I've observed over the years. Smart guy, good education, ambitious dreams. He discovered Napoleon Hill's work in his 20s and became obsessed with the idea of thinking himself rich. He created vision boards, practiced daily affirmations, visualized his success with burning intensity. For months, he followed every technique he could find. He woke up early to read success literature. He listened to motivational podcasts during his commute. He networked aggressively, pitching his business ideas to anyone who would listen. He was doing everything right according to conventional wisdom. but his business ventures kept failing. His relationships suffered under the strain of his relentless positivity. His finances deteriorated as he invested in one opportunity after another, each one promising to be his breakthrough. Friends and family began to see him as a dreamer, someone who talked big but delivered small. The more he struggled, the harder he tried to apply the techniques he'd learned. He doubled down on visualization, convinced that he just wasn't believing hard enough. He attended expensive seminars, certain that the next speaker would reveal the missing piece. He joined mastermind groups, seeking the accountability and support that would finally push him over the edge. Years passed. His hair began to thin. His confidence cracked. The bright optimism that had once energized his efforts transformed into desperate hope, then bitter resignation. He started to believe that success was reserved for other people, that he simply didn't have what it took, that the whole self-help industry was an elaborate scam designed to profit from people's dreams. Marcus never understood that he was trying to access a radio station while tuned to the wrong frequency. He had the equipment, the intention, even the dedication, but he was operating from surface consciousness, trying to manifest results through force of will rather than alignment with deeper principles. He thought success was about pushing harder when it's actually about positioning correctly. He believed it was about positive thinking when it's actually about paradoxical thinking. He assumed it required more effort when it actually requires more awareness. Marcus represents millions of people who consume success content but never experience success transformation. They mistake activity for progress, information for wisdom, hope for strategy. They live in a perpetual state of almost there, always one technique away from their breakthrough, always one insight away from their transformation. What they don't realize is that they're trying to solve a three-dimensional problem with two-dimensional thinking. They're attempting to create extraordinary results while maintaining ordinary consciousness. It's like trying to perform surgery with gardening tools. The intention might be noble, but the instruments are inadequate for the task. The most tragic part is that they often work harder than the people who achieve effortless success. They sacrifice more, struggle more, stress more, but they're running on a treadmill, generating tremendous activity while making no forward progress. They confuse motion with movement, busyness with effectiveness, intensity with intelligence. Watch how most people approach obstacles. They see a wall and immediately start looking for ways to break through it. They attack it with determination, persistence, positive thinking. They bang their heads against it until they're bloody and exhausted, then conclude that success requires superhuman effort or extraordinary luck. Meanwhile, people operating on the shadow frequency approach the same wall differently. They don't try to break through it or climb over it. They don't even see it as an obstacle. They recognize it as information, as feedback from their environment about the need to adjust their approach. Instead of forcing a solution, they step back and examine the situation from multiple angles. They ask better questions. Why is this wall here? What purpose does it serve? How can I use it to my advantage? Is there a way around it that I haven't considered? What would happen if I simply waited for it to move on its own? This different approach isn't just about problem-solving techniques. It's about operating from a fundamentally different level of consciousness. It's about recognizing that the universe operates according to principles that most people never learn to perceive, much less leverage. Most people try to manifest their desires through effort and willpower. They approach success like they're trying to force a key into the wrong lock, applying more and more pressure until something breaks. They don't understand that the universe responds to resonance, not resistance. They don't know how to align their internal frequency with the outcomes they desire. This misalignment creates tremendous internal friction. They want wealth, but feel guilty about money. They desire success, but fear the responsibility it brings. They crave recognition, but worry about becoming arrogant. They're like cars with the accelerator and brake pressed simultaneously, generating lots of heat and noise, but making little forward progress. The masses have been taught to believe that success requires sacrifice, that achievement demands suffering, that wealth comes only through struggle. These beliefs create the very resistance they're trying to overcome. They're trying to swim upstream in a river that could easily carry them to their destination, if they knew how to position themselves correctly. People operating on surface consciousness live in a world of separation and scarcity. They believe that someone else's success diminishes their own opportunities. They compete instead of collaborate. They hoard instead of circulate. They defend instead of explore. This scarcity mindset creates exactly the limitations they fear. When you approach life believing that resources are limited, you unconsciously sabotage opportunities that could expand your possibilities. When you believe that success is difficult, you unconsciously choose paths that ensure difficulty. When you believe that wealth requires sacrifice, you unconsciously create circumstances that demand sacrifice. The unconscious mind is incredibly literal. It doesn't distinguish between what you want and what you expect. It simply works to make your deepest beliefs manifest in your external reality. If you believe success is hard, your unconscious mind will ensure that your path to success is indeed difficult. If you believe money is the root of all evil, your unconscious mind will protect you from wealth by sabotaging your financial opportunities. Most people never recognize this internal sabotage because it operates below the level of conscious awareness. They see only the external circumstances, the failed ventures, the missed opportunities, the unexpected setbacks. They never connect these patterns to their unconscious programming. This is why positive thinking alone rarely produces positive results. You can't override deeply embedded beliefs with surface-level affirmations. It's like trying to change the direction of a river by talking to the water while ignoring the underlying topography that determines its flow. Real transformation requires you to descend into the deeper layers of consciousness where your fundamental beliefs about reality are stored. It requires you to examine and often completely rewire the unconscious assumptions that govern your perceptions and choices. But most people resist this deeper work. It's easier to try another technique, read another book, attend another seminar. It's more comfortable to believe that success is just one strategy away, rather than acknowledging that it requires a fundamental transformation of consciousness. They remain surface surfers, skimming across the waves of possibility without ever diving into the depths where the real treasures lie hidden. They experience life as a series of external events happening to them, rather than recognizing their role as conscious creators of their experience. This external orientation makes them vulnerable to every shift in circumstances. When things go well, they feel successful. When challenges arise, they feel like victims. Their emotional state fluctuates with market conditions, weather patterns, other people's moods, news headlines. They're like ships without anchors, constantly blown off course by forces they perceive as beyond their control. People operating from the shadow frequency maintain their center regardless of external turbulence. They've learned to generate their emotional state internally rather than allowing circumstances to dictate their experience. They understand that external events are neutral until consciousness assigns meaning to them. This doesn't mean they ignore reality or pretend that challenges don't exist. It means they approach difficulties as information rather than threats, as opportunities for growth rather than evidence of failure, as temporary conditions rather than permanent limitations. Most people make the mistake of trying to change their external circumstances before addressing their internal state. They believe that if they can just earn more money, find the right relationship, live in the perfect city, then they'll finally be happy and successful. They spend their entire lives chasing external validation while remaining internally unchanged. This backwards approach ensures perpetual frustration. Even when they achieve their external goals, they discover that the satisfaction is temporary. The promotion they thought would fulfill them brings new stresses. The relationship they believed would complete them reveals new challenges. The wealth they imagined would solve their problems creates new complications. Meanwhile, people who have learned to access deeper frequencies work from the inside out. They cultivate the internal state they desire, then allow external circumstances to align with their inner reality. They understand that you can't have something you're not prepared to be, that you can't maintain results that exceed your level of consciousness. This principle explains why lottery winners often end up broke, why inherited wealth frequently disappears within a generation, why people who achieve sudden fame often self-destruct, Their external circumstances changed faster than their internal development could support. They had the external trappings of success without the internal architecture to sustain it. The masses approach success like tourists visiting a foreign country. They observe it from the outside, take pictures, buy souvenirs, but never truly understand the culture. They might temporarily experience success, but they can't maintain it because they never learn to think like successful people. They copy behaviors without understanding principles. They mimic strategies without grasping consciousness. They try to adopt the external habits of wealthy people while maintaining the internal programming of the poor. It's like trying to speak a foreign language by memorizing phrases without understanding grammar. You might communicate basic ideas, but you'll never achieve fluency. Napoleon Hill understood this distinction. He realized that the millionaires he interviewed weren't just doing different things, they were being different people. They had access to levels of consciousness that operated according to entirely different principles than the awareness most people experience. The challenge Hill faced was how to communicate this understanding to people who had never experienced these deeper states of consciousness. How do you describe color to someone who has been blind from birth? How do you explain music to someone who has been deaf their entire life? Hill did his best to translate these deeper principles into concepts and techniques that ordinary consciousness could grasp. But in the process of translation, much of the essential essence was lost. People learned the forms without accessing the consciousness that gives those forms their power. This is why you can find thousands of people who have memorized Think and Grow Rich, but very few who have actually thought and grown rich. They have the words but not the music, the notes but not the melody, the ingredients but not the recipe for combining them into something transformative. The real secret, the dark trick that Hill only whispered about in private, wasn't in any particular technique or strategy. It was in learning to access and operate from a level of consciousness that most people never know exists. It was about upgrading your mental operating system rather than just installing new applications. Most people spend their entire lives trying to improve their performance while using obsolete software. They wonder why they can't compete with others who seem to operate with supernatural efficiency and effectiveness. They don't realize that those people aren't just working harder or smarter. They're working from an entirely different platform. This platform exists within your neural architecture right now. You don't need to develop it or acquire it or earn access to it. You simply need to learn how to recognize it and consciously activate it. You need to learn how to tune into frequencies that have been broadcasting all around you your entire life, but which you've never known how to receive. The tragedy is that most people will live and die without ever discovering these capabilities. They'll experience brief moments of clarity, occasional flashes of insight, random instances of perfect timing, but they'll dismiss these as coincidences rather than recognizing them as glimpses of their true potential. They'll continue trying to force success through effort and willpower rather than learning to align with the natural principles that govern achievement. They'll remain victims of circumstances rather than recognizing their power to influence those circumstances through shifts in consciousness. They'll keep looking for external solutions to internal challenges, for techniques that will compensate for underdeveloped awareness, for strategies that will bypass the need for real transformation. They'll remain perpetual students of success rather than graduates who have learned to apply its deeper principles. But what if you decided to be different? What if you refused to accept the limitations that trap most people in cycles of struggle and frustration? What if you committed to discovering and developing the capabilities that Napoleon Hill and other giants of achievement accessed naturally? What if you decided that your current level of consciousness, no matter how sophisticated it might seem, is actually quite primitive compared to what's possible? What if you approached your development like an athlete training for the Olympics rather than a hobbyist playing around on weekends? What if you recognized that the difference between where you are and where you want to be isn't in external circumstances, but in internal awareness? What if you understood that every limitation you've accepted, every excuse you've made, every failure you've experienced has been the result of operating from incomplete consciousness rather than actual inability? And what if you decided, right here and right now, that you would do whatever it takes to access the deeper frequencies that separate the masses from the masters, the dreamers from the achievers, the hopeful from the powerful. The pattern becomes clear when you study the lives of those who achieved what others deemed impossible. Napoleon Hill didn't discover this principle in isolation. He recognized it as the common thread woven through the consciousness of every person who had transcended ordinary limitations. Carl Jung understood it when he wrote about the shadow self and the process of individuation. He recognized that true power comes not from rejecting the darker aspects of human nature, but from integrating them consciously. The very traits that society teaches us to suppress, our aggression, our selfishness, our hunger for dominance, become our greatest assets when properly channeled. Viktor Frankl witnessed it in the concentration camps, where he observed that survival wasn't determined by physical strength or external circumstances, but by the ability to maintain meaning and purpose even in the face of ultimate adversity. Those who survived had learned to access an internal resource that transcended their immediate situation. Epictetus taught it 2,000 years ago when he distinguished between what is within our control and what lies beyond it. The Stoics understood that freedom comes not from changing external circumstances, but from mastering our internal responses to those circumstances. They knew that the same event could destroy one person and forge another, depending entirely on how consciousness interpreted and utilized the experience. Friedrich Nietzsche pointed toward it when he spoke of the will to power and the creation of values. He understood that ordinary people allow their values to be determined by society, while extraordinary individuals consciously create their own meaning and impose their will upon reality. James Clear touched on it when he wrote about identity-based habits and the power of small changes compounded over time. He recognized that sustainable transformation occurs not through dramatic external changes, but through subtle shifts in identity that accumulate into profound results. What all these thinkers understood, though they expressed it in different languages, is that human consciousness operates on multiple levels simultaneously. Most people live exclusively on the surface level, where they experience themselves as separate from their environment, subject to forces beyond their control, limited by circumstances they didn't choose. But beneath this surface level lies a deeper stratum of awareness that operates according to entirely different principles. At this level, the boundaries between self and environment become permeable. Time becomes fluid. Cause and effect relationships reveal themselves to be far more complex and interconnected than linear thinking suggests. Think of consciousness like an iceberg. The tip that emerges above water represents the ordinary awareness that most people mistake for the totality of their being. It's the realm of thoughts, emotions, sensory experiences, and social conditioning. This surface consciousness is useful for navigating daily life, but it's woefully inadequate for creating extraordinary results. The vast bulk of the iceberg lies hidden beneath the surface. This is where your real power resides. It's the realm of intuitive intelligence, pattern recognition, creative synthesis, and what some call supernatural timing. It's the level of awareness that allows you to sense opportunities before they become obvious, to navigate complex situations with minimal effort, to influence outcomes through subtle adjustments rather than brute force. Most people never learn to access this deeper level because they've been conditioned to believe that the surface level is all there is. They've been taught that thoughts and emotions are the primary drivers of behavior, that external circumstances determine internal experiences, that success requires struggle and sacrifice. These beliefs create what psychologists call learned helplessness, the conviction that you have little control over your outcomes and must therefore adapt to whatever circumstances arise. This helplessness becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, creating exactly the limitations it assumes to be inevitable. But here's the paradox that Napoleon Hill discovered. The path to accessing deeper levels of consciousness requires you to first acknowledge the shadow aspects of your nature that surface consciousness works so hard to suppress. You must embrace your hunger for power, your capacity for ruthlessness, your willingness to prioritize your own interests above the comfort of others. This doesn't mean becoming cruel or evil. It means recognizing that these supposedly negative traits, when consciously directed, become the fuel for extraordinary achievement. Your hunger for power becomes the drive to create value and influence outcomes. Your capacity for ruthlessness becomes the ability to make difficult decisions that serve your higher purpose. Your willingness to prioritize your own interests becomes the foundation for building something valuable enough to serve others. Most people try to manifest success while simultaneously rejecting the very qualities that success requires. They want wealth while feeling guilty about money. They desire influence while avoiding responsibility. They crave recognition while hiding their ambition. This internal conflict creates a frequency mismatch that makes sustained success impossible. Think of it like trying to tune into a radio station while simultaneously broadcasting interference on the same frequency. The signal becomes scrambled, distorted, impossible to receive clearly. Your conscious desires and unconscious resistances cancel each other out, leaving you trapped in cycles of effort without achievement. The solution isn't to eliminate these internal contradictions through positive thinking or affirmations. The solution is to descend into your shadow self and consciously integrate these rejected aspects of your nature. You must become comfortable with your own power, your own darkness, your own capacity for influence and control. This integration process is what alchemists called the negredo, the blackening phase, where all the rejected materials are brought to the surface and transmuted into gold. It's what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a whole, integrated person rather than a collection of socially acceptable facades. Carl Jung observed that people who achieve extraordinary success in any field inevitably display characteristics that would be considered pathological in ordinary individuals. They possess an almost supernatural focus that can appear obsessive. They demonstrate a willingness to sacrifice relationships, comfort, and social approval for their vision. They exhibit a kind of controlled ruthlessness that allows them to make decisions that would paralyze more conventional minds. But Jung also noticed that these individuals had learned to channel these intense energies in service of something larger than their personal comfort or social acceptance. They had found ways to transform their potential destructiveness into creative force, their selfishness into service, their darkness into light. This transformation doesn't happen through suppression or denial. It happens through what Jung called holding the tension of the opposites, learning to contain contradictory energies within your consciousness until they synthesize into something entirely new. Think of a blacksmith working with fire and metal. The fire isn't good or evil. It's simply a force that can either create or destroy depending on how it's directed. The blacksmith doesn't try to eliminate the fire's dangerous potential. Instead, he learns to harness its intensity for constructive purposes. Your shadow energies work the same way. Your anger, properly channeled, becomes passion for justice. Your greed becomes drive for abundance. Your pride becomes confidence in your abilities. Your fear becomes wisdom about genuine threats. Your sadness becomes compassion for others' suffering. Most people experience these energies as problems to be solved, rather than resources to be utilized. They try to eliminate anger instead of learning to direct it. They suppress greed instead of transforming it into healthy ambition. They hide their pride instead of developing genuine confidence. This suppression doesn't eliminate these energies. It simply drives them underground where they operate unconsciously, often sabotaging the very outcomes you're trying to create. Unexpressed anger becomes passive aggression. Denied greed becomes chronic dissatisfaction. Hidden pride becomes defensive arrogance. Napoleon Hill understood that the most successful people he interviewed had learned to work with these shadow energies rather than against them. They had developed what he called transmutation, the ability to convert base impulses into noble purposes. Andrew Carnegie's relentless acquisition of wealth was driven by a deep hunger for power and control. But Carnegie had learned to channel this hunger in service of building infrastructure that would benefit millions of people. His shadow served his light rather than undermining it. Henry Ford's obsession with efficiency and control could have made him a petty tyrant. Instead, he directed these energies toward revolutionizing manufacturing and making automobiles accessible to ordinary people. His need for control became a force for democratizing transportation. Thomas Edison's ego and competitiveness could have made him a destructive rival to other inventors. Instead, he channeled these energies into prolific innovation that illuminated the world. His shadow became the fuel for his genius. Each of these individuals had learned what Nietzsche called self-overcoming, the process of transforming your lower nature in service of your higher purpose. They didn't deny their shadow, they consciously directed it. This is the dark trick that Napoleon Hill discovered, but never fully revealed. Extraordinary achievement requires you to embrace and integrate the aspects of your personality that ordinary morality teaches you to reject. You must become comfortable with your own power, your own darkness, your own capacity for influence and control. But this integration must be conscious and purposeful. Unconscious shadow expression leads to destructive behavior, harmful relationships, and eventual self-sabotage. Conscious shadow integration leads to authentic power, sustainable success, and the ability to influence outcomes while serving something larger than your personal comfort. The process begins with honest self-examination. You must identify the aspects of your nature that you've learned to hide, deny, or suppress. What drives you that you're afraid to admit? What do you want that you're embarrassed to acknowledge? What are you capable of that you pretend not to possess? This exploration requires tremendous courage because it means confronting parts of yourself that your ego would prefer to keep hidden. You might discover that you're more selfish than you like to admit, more hungry for power than feels socially acceptable, more willing to manipulate outcomes than your self-image allows. Most people flee from these discoveries. They prefer the comfortable delusion of believing themselves to be purely good, entirely moral, completely selfless. But this self-deception cuts them off from the very energies they need to create extraordinary results. Epictetus taught that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about events. The same principle applies to self-knowledge. You suffer not from your shadow aspects, but from your judgment that these aspects are inherently bad or wrong. What if your hunger for power is actually your soul's way of preparing you to influence positive change in the world? What if your capacity for ruthlessness is exactly what you'll need to make difficult decisions that serve your higher purpose? What if your selfishness is really a healthy drive to develop your capabilities so you can contribute something valuable? The key is learning to distinguish between unconscious shadow expression and conscious shadow integration. Unconscious expression is reactive, destructive, and serves only immediate gratification. Conscious integration is purposeful, constructive, and serves long-term vision. Viktor Frankl observed that those who survived the concentration camps were not necessarily the physically strongest or most optimistic. They were those who had found ways to create meaning from their suffering, to transform their darkest experiences into sources of strength and wisdom. This same principle applies to your shadow integration. Your deepest wounds, your most shameful impulses, your darkest experiences can become your greatest sources of power when consciously transformed. The very things you're most ashamed of might contain the keys to your most authentic success. James Clear writes about the power of identity-based change, becoming the type of person who naturally produces the results you desire. But he doesn't address how to transform identity when it contains elements you've been taught to reject. The answer lies in reframing your relationship with these rejected aspects. Instead of seeing them as flaws to overcome, recognize them as raw materials to be refined. Instead of hiding them from others, learn to integrate them so completely that they become sources of authentic power rather than shameful secrets. This integration creates what Jung called the transcendent function, a level of consciousness that can hold apparent contradictions without being torn apart by them. You become capable of being both gentle and fierce, both selfless and self-interested, both humble and confident, depending on what the situation requires. Most people remain trapped in either-or thinking. They believe they must choose between being good or effective, moral or successful, kind or powerful. This false dichotomy forces them to sacrifice parts of themselves and thus operate from incomplete consciousness. Integrated individuals develop both and thinking. They become comfortable with paradox, skilled at accessing different aspects of their nature as circumstances require. They can be ruthlessly focused on their goals while remaining genuinely caring toward others. They can be completely selfish in developing their capabilities while being profoundly generous in sharing their gifts. This both-and consciousness is what allows access to the shadow frequency. When you no longer need to suppress or deny any aspect of your nature, your mental energy is no longer divided against itself. You become like a laser beam, focused, coherent, and capable of cutting through obstacles that would scatter ordinary light. The ancient alchemists understood this principle when they sought to transform lead into gold. They weren't really trying to change one metal into another. They were using chemical processes as metaphors for psychological transformation. The lead represented the crude, unrefined aspects of human nature. The gold represented consciousness that had learned to integrate and direct these crude energies for noble purposes. Napoleon Hill's dark trick was teaching people how to perform this alchemical transformation within their own consciousness. But he knew that most people weren't ready for the complete truth. They wanted techniques and strategies that would allow them to bypass the difficult work of shadow integration. So Hill gave them what they could handle: visualization techniques, goal-setting methods, positive thinking practices. These tools can produce some results, but they'll never generate the extraordinary outcomes that come from operating with fully integrated consciousness. The complete transformation requires you to descend into your own psychological underworld, to confront and befriend the very aspects of yourself that you've spent your life trying to escape. You must learn to love your shadow before you can transform it. This doesn't mean indulging destructive impulses or abandoning moral standards. It means recognizing that your shadow contains not just destructive potential, but also creative power that you've never learned to access. Your darkness, properly understood and consciously directed, becomes the foundation for your light. Most people try to create success by adding positive elements to their personality while leaving their fundamental structure unchanged. It's like trying to build a skyscraper on a foundation of sand. The structure might rise for a while, but it will inevitably collapse when tested by real pressure. True transformation requires you to excavate down to bedrock, to the deepest levels of your psychological structure, and rebuild from there. You must be willing to dismantle the carefully constructed persona that you've presented to the world and discover who you really are beneath the social conditioning. This process is neither comfortable nor quick. It requires the kind of sustained commitment that most people reserve for external achievements. But it's the only path to the level of authentic power that allows you to create results that seem supernatural to ordinary consciousness. The reward for this difficult work is access to capabilities that most people never know exist. You develop what some call intuitive intelligence, the ability to sense patterns and possibilities that aren't yet visible to rational analysis. You cultivate what others call presence, a quality of focused attention that influences everyone around you without effort. You discover that when consciousness is no longer divided against itself, when all aspects of your nature are consciously integrated and purposefully directed, you begin to operate from what Hill called the master frequency. From this level of awareness, obstacles become opportunities, setbacks become course corrections, and what others experience as struggle becomes a form of play. But first, you must be willing to question everything you think you know about success, morality, and human nature. You must be prepared to discover that the very qualities you've been taught to suppress might be exactly what you need to create the life you truly desire. Are you ready to begin that exploration? Are you willing to discover what lies hidden in the shadows of your own consciousness? Can you imagine what might become possible if you learn to harness the full spectrum of your human nature, rather than operating from only the parts that society deems acceptable? The choice, as always, is yours. But remember, you can't create extraordinary results while maintaining ordinary consciousness. The time for half measures and comfortable compromises is over. The next level of your development awaits, but it requires you to become someone your current self might not even recognize. Stop theorizing. Stop consuming more information. Stop waiting for the perfect moment or the ideal circumstances. The time for intellectual understanding is over. Now comes the forging of a new consciousness through deliberate daily practice. What you're about to learn isn't theory. It's the practical alchemy that separates those who talk about transformation from those who actually transform. These are the specific practices that allow you to access and operate from the shadow frequency on demand, in real time under pressure. Master these 5 practices, and you will never again be at the mercy of your circumstances, your emotions, or other people's agendas. Ignore them, and you'll remain forever trapped in the comfortable prison of ordinary consciousness. First practice, the morning interrogation. Each morning, before you check your phone, before you speak to another human being, before you allow the world to impose its agenda upon your consciousness, conduct what I call the morning interrogation. This isn't meditation or visualization. It's a ruthless examination of your internal state, designed to establish conscious control over your mental frequency. Sit in complete silence and ask yourself 3 questions. What am I afraid of today? Don't give yourself comfortable, socially acceptable answers. Dig deeper. Are you afraid of being exposed as inadequate? Are you afraid of succeeding and having to live up to higher expectations? Are you afraid of discovering that you're more powerful than you've allowed yourself to believe? Identify the specific fear that's operating beneath your conscious awareness. What do I secretly want that I'm pretending not to want? This is where you confront your shadow desires. Do you want to dominate your competitors? Do you want to be recognized as superior to your peers? Do you want enough money to never have to consider anyone else's opinion again? Stop pretending these desires don't exist. They're not shameful, they're fuel. What truth am I avoiding about my current situation? Look at your relationships, your finances, your career, your health. What are you pretending not to see? What uncomfortable reality are you dancing around? Where are you lying to yourself to maintain comfort? Face these truths without flinching. This interrogation isn't about beating yourself up or wallowing in negativity. It's about establishing conscious contact with the parts of your psyche that usually operate in the shadows. When you shine the light of awareness on these hidden dynamics, they lose their power to sabotage you unconsciously. When Susan, a marketing executive I worked with, began practicing the morning interrogation, she discovered that her fear of being seen as selfish was causing her to undercharge for her services. Her secret desire was to earn enough money to support her elderly parents without sacrificing her own security. The truth she was avoiding was that her people-pleasing behavior was actually hurting her clients by preventing her from giving them her best work. Within 3 months of facing these realities honestly, Susan had doubled her rates and attracted clients who valued her expertise rather than her compliance. The fears and desires she had been hiding became the foundation for authentic success. Second practice, strategic emotional disruption. Most people are slaves to their emotional reactions. Something happens, they feel angry or sad or frustrated, and they behave accordingly. They think they're being authentic, but they're actually being automatic. You're going to develop emotional sovereignty, the ability to choose your emotional state based on what serves your objectives rather than what feels natural in the moment. Throughout the day, whenever you notice a strong emotional reaction arising, immediately ask yourself, is this emotion serving my long-term objectives, or is it simply a conditioned response? If it's serving you, amplify it. If it's not, disrupt it. Here's how to disrupt unconstructive emotions in real time. When anger arises and it's not serving your objectives, don't try to suppress it. That never works. Instead, transform it. Ask yourself, what would this anger look like if it were expressed as focused determination rather than reactive rage? Feel the energy of the anger, but direct it toward your goals rather than toward destruction. When fear appears and it's protecting you from genuine danger, listen to it. But when it's simply trying to keep you comfortable and small, challenge it directly. Ask yourself, what would I do right now if I were completely fearless? Then do that thing immediately, before your conditioning can reassert control. When sadness emerges and it's helping you process loss or develop compassion, honor it. But when it's simply a habit that keeps you feeling like a victim, interrupt it. Ask yourself, what would this situation look like if I viewed it as an opportunity rather than a tragedy. Shift your perspective until you can see the hidden gift in your apparent loss. Marcus, a real estate investor, used to become paralyzed by fear whenever he considered making large deals. Instead of trying to eliminate the fear, he learned to ask, what would this fear look like if it were transformed into excitement about opportunity? He discovered that fear and excitement generate almost identical physiological responses. The only difference is the story you tell yourself about what the sensations mean. By reframing his fear as excitement, Marcus was able to pursue deals that his competitors avoided due to their emotional reactions. Within 2 years, he had built a portfolio worth over $8 million. Third practice, conversational Aikido. Most people approach conversations like wrestlers. They try to overpower resistance through force and volume. You're going to learn to approach them like an Aikido master, redirecting energy rather than opposing it, using other people's momentum to achieve your objectives. This practice begins with recognizing that every conversation involves multiple levels of communication simultaneously. There's the surface level, the actual words being spoken. There's the emotional level, the feelings behind the words. And there's the power level, who's controlling the direction and outcome of the interaction. Master conversational Aikido by following these principles. Never argue with the words, redirect the energy. When someone attacks your ideas or challenges your position, don't defend against their specific arguments. Instead, acknowledge their perspective and redirect the conversation toward areas where you can find common ground or mutual benefit. If a colleague says, "Your proposal is completely unrealistic," don't respond with data proving them wrong. Instead, say something like, "I understand your concern about feasibility. What would need to be true for an approach like this to work in our situation?" You've acknowledged their position while redirecting the conversation toward problem solving rather than position defending. Use questions to control direction without appearing controlling. Instead of making statements that invite resistance, ask questions that guide thinking toward the conclusions you want them to reach on their own. Rather than saying, "We need to change our pricing strategy," ask, "What do you think would happen to our market position if our competitors continued lowering their prices while we maintained our current structure?" Let them connect the dots and arrive at your conclusion independently. Respond to emotions, not just words. When someone is communicating emotionally, whether through anger, fear, excitement, or sadness, acknowledge the emotion before addressing the content. "I can see this situation is really frustrating for you," creates connection before you attempt direction. Lisa, a project manager, used to have constant conflicts with her team members who resisted her initiatives. After learning conversational Aikido, she stopped trying to convince people her ideas were right and started asking questions that helped them discover the benefits for themselves. When team members complained about new procedures, instead of defending the procedures, she would ask, "What challenges are you facing with our current approach that these changes might help solve?" This shifted the conversation from resistance to collaboration, and her project completion rates improved by 40%. Fourth practice, micro-decision mastery. Your life is shaped not by the major decisions you make once or twice a year, but by the micro-decisions you make hundreds of times each day. These small choices, what to eat, how to respond to interruptions, whether to check your phone, when to speak, and when to remain silent, accumulate into the patterns that determine your results. Most people make these micro-decisions unconsciously, based on whatever feels comfortable or familiar in the moment. You're going to make them consciously, based on what serves your long-term objectives. Start by identifying your decision points. Throughout the day, notice moments when you have a choice between 2 or more options. These might include whether to hit the snooze button or get up immediately when your alarm sounds, whether to check social media or focus on your priority tasks, whether to eat the convenient option or the nutritious option, whether to respond immediately to non-urgent messages or batch them for later, whether to engage in gossip or redirect conversations toward productive topics. At each decision point, pause for just 3 seconds and ask yourself, which choice aligns with the person I'm becoming rather than the person I've been? Then make that choice regardless of what feels comfortable or natural. This practice develops what psychologists call executive function, your ability to override automatic responses and choose behaviors based on conscious intention rather than unconscious conditioning. David, an entrepreneur building his second company, noticed that his habit of immediately responding to every email was fragmenting his attention and reducing his creative output. He implemented a micro-decision practice around email. Every time he felt the urge to check messages, he would pause and ask, "Is this the highest value activity I could be doing right now?" This simple 3-second pause allowed him to redirect his attention to revenue-generating activities during his peak energy hours. Within 6 months, his company's growth rate had tripled, and he was working fewer hours while producing better results. The key to micro-decision mastery is consistency rather than perfection. You don't need to make the optimal choice every single time. You just need to make conscious choices more often than unconscious ones. Over time, this shifts the trajectory of your development in ways that compound into extraordinary results. Fifth practice, energy audit and allocation. Most people approach energy management like they have an unlimited supply. They scatter their attention across dozens of activities, relationships, and concerns without considering the cumulative cost. Then they wonder why they feel exhausted despite not accomplishing anything significant. You're going to treat your energy like a venture capitalist treats investment capital, allocating it strategically to activities and relationships that generate the highest returns while ruthlessly cutting investments that drain resources without producing results. Begin by conducting a weekly energy audit. At the end of each week, review how you spent your time and attention. Categorize your activities into 4 types: high energy input, high value output, activities that require significant effort but produce meaningful results. These might include challenging creative projects, important relationship conversations, strategic planning sessions, or skill development that advances your objectives. Low energy input, high value output, activities that produce significant results with minimal effort. These might include systems you've created that generate passive income, relationships that energize rather than drain you, or habits that maintain your health and clarity with minimal conscious attention. High energy input, low value output, activities that consume significant energy but produce minimal results. These might include time spent on social media, engaging in arguments with people who aren't open to changing their minds, perfectionist behaviors that don't improve outcomes, or maintaining relationships that consistently drain your energy. Low energy input, low value output, activities that neither require much energy nor produce much value. These might include mindless entertainment, routine tasks that could be automated or delegated, or conversations that neither educate nor inspire you. Your objective is to gradually increase time spent in the first 2 categories while eliminating time spent in the last 2 categories. This isn't about becoming a productivity machine. It's about consciously directing your life force toward outcomes that matter to you. Rachel, a consultant who was earning good money but feeling constantly overwhelmed, discovered through her energy audit that she was spending 20 hours per week on low-value activities that she could eliminate or delegate. She was also maintaining several client relationships that demanded high energy but produced minimal financial or professional returns. By systematically redirecting her energy allocation, Rachel was able to increase her income by 60% while working 15 fewer hours per week. More importantly, she regained the mental clarity and creative energy that had attracted clients to her in the first place. Integration protocol. These 5 practices work synergistically. The morning interrogation establishes conscious contact with your shadow aspects. Strategic emotional disruption gives you control over your internal state. Conversational Aikido extends that control into your interactions with others. Micro-decision mastery aligns your small choices with your large objectives. Energy audit and allocation ensures you're investing your life force strategically rather than scattering it randomly. Don't try to implement all 5 practices simultaneously. That's a recipe for overwhelm and abandonment. Instead, focus on one practice for a full week before adding the next. Allow each practice to become automatic before layering on additional complexity. Week 1. Morning interrogation only. 7 days of honest self-examination to establish baseline awareness. Week 2. Add strategic emotional disruption. Begin taking conscious control of your emotional responses while maintaining the morning interrogation. Week 3. Add conversational Aikido. Start redirecting interactions while maintaining emotional sovereignty and daily self-examination. Week 4. Add micro-decision mastery. Begin making conscious choices at decision points while maintaining all previous practices. Week 5. Add energy audit and allocation. Complete the integration by strategically directing your life force while maintaining all previous practices. By the end of 5 weeks, you'll be operating from a fundamentally different level of consciousness than when you started. People will notice that something has changed about you, though they won't be able to identify exactly what. You'll seem more confident without being arrogant, more focused without being rigid, more powerful without being aggressive. These practices don't just change your behavior, they rewire your neural pathways to support sustained access to the shadow frequency. You'll find yourself naturally making choices that serve your long-term objectives rather than your immediate comfort. You'll develop an almost supernatural ability to remain centered during chaos and to influence outcomes through subtle adjustments rather than dramatic efforts. But remember, these practices work only if you work them. Reading about them produces nothing. Understanding them intellectually changes nothing. Only consistent application generates the transformation that separates those who dream about success from those who create it. The question isn't whether these practices work. The question is whether you have the discipline to work them consistently, even when you don't feel like it, even when the results aren't immediately obvious, even when your old conditioning tries to pull you back toward familiar patterns. Every morning when you conduct your interrogation, you're choosing conscious evolution over unconscious repetition. Every time you disrupt an unconstructive emotion, you're choosing sovereignty over slavery. Every conversation where you practice Aikido principles, you're choosing influence over force. Every micro-decision made consciously, you're choosing intention over conditioning. Every strategic energy allocation, you're choosing investment over expense. These choices, accumulated over weeks and months, create a compound effect that transforms not just your external results, but your fundamental identity. You become the type of person who naturally produces extraordinary outcomes rather than someone who occasionally experiences them through luck or temporary effort. The path is clear. The practices are specific. The only question remaining is, will you begin today or will you remain forever trapped in the comfortable prison of your current limitations? Choose wisely. Choose consciously. Choose now. You are standing at the threshold of a transformation so profound that your current identity will seem like a childhood costume you've finally outgrown. What you've learned so far has been preparation. What you're about to understand will become the living foundation of who you are becoming. Napoleon Hill didn't just discover techniques for success. He uncovered the archetypal patterns that govern human transformation. These patterns exist as eternal templates within the collective unconscious, waiting to be activated by individuals ready to embody them fully. There are 3 primary archetypes that every person who achieves genuine mastery learns to embody. Not sequentially, but simultaneously. Not partially, but completely. These aren't roles you play or masks you wear. They become integrated aspects of your essential nature. The sculptor's mastery. Patience carved in stone. Deep in the heart of Renaissance Italy, Michelangelo approaches a massive block of Carrara marble. Others see only rough stone, raw material, potential waiting to be shaped. But Michelangelo sees David trapped within the marble, perfect and complete, needing only to have the excess removed. You are both the sculptor and the marble. Your current self, with all its limitations, fears, and conditioned responses, is the rough stone. Your awakened self, the person capable of accessing the shadow frequency at will, already exists within you, perfect and complete. The practices you've learned are your tools, time and patience are your allies. But here's what most people misunderstand about the sculptor's work. The art isn't in adding material to create something new. The art is in recognizing what doesn't belong and having the courage to remove it, chip by chip, day by day, without rushing the process or forcing premature results. Watch how Michelangelo works. He doesn't attack the marble with violent force, trying to reshape it through brute strength. He studies it first, understanding its natural grain, its hidden stresses, its inherent possibilities. Then he removes only what needs to be removed, always working with the stone's nature rather than against it. Your transformation follows the same pattern. You're not trying to become someone completely different. You're uncovering who you already are beneath the accumulated layers of social conditioning, family programming, and protective mechanisms you developed to survive in a world that couldn't see your true nature. Every fear you face, honestly, is a chip of unnecessary marble falling away. Every limiting belief you question is another layer of concealment removed. Every moment you choose conscious response over automatic reaction, you reveal more of the masterpiece that has always existed within you. But sculpture requires something that modern culture has forgotten how to value: patience. Not passive waiting, but active patience. The kind of patience that can work on a single project for 4 years, knowing that each day's work brings incremental progress toward a vision only you can see clearly. Maria, a software engineer who felt trapped in corporate mediocrity, began to understand herself as a sculptor when she started her own company. Instead of trying to transform her business overnight, she adopted what she called marble mindset. Each day, she would identify one element that didn't belong in her vision and remove it. One inefficient process, one energy-draining client relationship, one limiting belief about what she was capable of achieving. Over 2 years, she gradually carved away everything that wasn't aligned with her highest potential. What remained was a company that generated more income in 6 months than her previous job had provided in 3 years. But more importantly, she had become someone who trusted her own creative vision enough to bring it into physical reality. The sculptor understands that true mastery comes not from speed, but from precision, not from force, but from finesse, not from adding complexity, but from achieving elegant simplicity. Every stroke of the chisel is deliberate. Every decision about what to remove is based on deep understanding of the final form. This is how you must approach your own development. Not as a frantic race to transform yourself as quickly as possible, but as a careful, deliberate process of removing everything that isn't authentically you. The sculptor doesn't compare his progress to other artists. He doesn't abandon his work when the results aren't immediately obvious. He trusts the process because he has faith in his vision. Your vision is your access to the shadow frequency. Your chisel is your daily practice. Your patience is what allows the work to proceed without forcing premature results. Every day you practice the morning interrogation, you're chipping away fear that doesn't serve you. Every time you disrupt an unconscious emotion, you're removing conditioned responses that obscure your true nature. Every conversation where you practice Aikido principles, you're carving away the need to control others through force. The sculpture emerges gradually. One day you'll notice that challenges that used to overwhelm you now seem manageable. Opportunities that you used to miss will become obvious. People will begin responding to you differently, though you won't always understand why. You'll have moments of clarity so profound that your previous confusion seems almost impossible to believe. These aren't signs that you're becoming someone different. They're signs that you're becoming more fully yourself. The river's wisdom, power in fluidity. Stand beside a great river, the Mississippi, the Amazon, the Nile. Feel its weight, its momentum, its unstoppable commitment to reaching the sea. This water has traveled thousands of miles, through deserts and forests, over falls and through canyons, always finding a way forward. But notice how the river moves. It doesn't fight against obstacles. It flows around them, over them, through them. When it encounters a mountain, it doesn't try to move the mountain. It patiently finds the valley. When it meets a cliff, it doesn't stop. It becomes a waterfall, using gravity as an ally rather than an enemy. Yet this same river that flows so gently around a stone can carve the Grand Canyon given enough time. The same force that seems so yielding and adaptable is actually the most persistent and transformative power on Earth. You must become like this river. Your desires, your ambitions, your vision of what you want to create, these are your destination, your inevitable ocean. But the path between where you are and where you're going will include obstacles that seem immovable, challenges that appear insurmountable, setbacks that feel like evidence that you should abandon your journey. The river teaches you a different approach. Instead of stopping when you encounter resistance, flow around it. Instead of trying to force solutions that require you to change external circumstances, find the natural path that allows you to work with existing conditions. When Jake started his consulting business, he kept encountering the same obstacle. Potential clients who liked his ideas but thought his prices were too high. His first instinct was to try to convince them they were wrong about money, to argue the value of his services, to pressure them into seeing things his way. But then he remembered the river's wisdom. Instead of trying to move the mountain of their price resistance, he found the valley around it. He created a lower-priced entry point that allowed clients to experience his value before investing in higher-level services. He turned price resistance into a natural flow that led to long-term relationships. Within a year, his revenue had increased by 300%, and many of his price-sensitive clients had become his highest-paying customers. He hadn't changed their nature. He had found ways to work with it. The river's power doesn't come from fighting against resistance. It comes from consistency, persistence, and the absolute certainty that it will reach its destination. Water doesn't question whether it can get to the ocean. It doesn't worry about how long the journey will take. It doesn't compare its progress to other rivers. It simply flows, day after day, always moving toward its inevitable destination. This is the consciousness you must cultivate. Your success isn't a question of if, it's only a question of when and how. When you adopt this river consciousness, you stop wasting energy on resistance and start investing it in flow. You stop trying to control timing and start trusting process. You stop fighting against your current circumstances and start using them as fuel for your forward movement. The river also teaches you about persistence without rigidity. Water maintains its essential nature while adapting its form to every container. It can be ice, liquid, or vapor depending on conditions, but it never stops being water. It can flow gently through a meadow or rush violently over a cliff, but it never forgets its destination. You must develop this same flexibility within consistency. Your core vision, your fundamental values, your commitment to accessing the shadow frequency. These remain constant, like water's essential nature. But your methods, your strategies, your specific approaches, these must adapt to circumstances like water adapting to its container. When you encounter people who don't understand your vision, don't try to force understanding. Flow around their limitations and find others who are ready for what you offer. When you face financial constraints, don't stop moving forward. Adapt your approach to work within current conditions while maintaining momentum toward your larger objectives. The river never argues with the landscape. It accepts what is and finds the most effective path forward, but it never compromises on reaching the ocean. It never settles for becoming a stagnant pond. It maintains its essential nature while working skillfully with whatever conditions it encounters. This river consciousness prevents the two mistakes that stop most people: giving up when they encounter resistance, or becoming so rigid in their approach that they break against immovable obstacles. You learn to bend without breaking, to adapt without compromising, to persist without forcing. Over time, this consistent flow creates results that seem impossible to those operating from rigid, force-based consciousness. Like the river carving through solid rock, your gentle but persistent movement toward your objectives creates changes that appear miraculous to outside observers, but feel entirely natural to you. The lighthouse's authority, illumination. Through being on a rocky cliff overlooking a treacherous coastline stands a lighthouse. For over 100 years, this tower has guided ships safely through dangerous waters. Storms have battered its walls. Hurricanes have tried to topple its foundation. Economic recessions have threatened its funding. Political changes have questioned its relevance, but the lighthouse has never moved from its position. It has never dimmed its light. It has never questioned its purpose or wondered if it should be doing something different. The lighthouse doesn't chase after ships to help them. It doesn't compete with other lighthouses for attention. It doesn't worry about whether ships appreciate its service or understand its value. It simply stands in its designated place and shines its light consistently, knowing that those who need guidance will find it. This is the final archetype you must embody, the lighthouse consciousness. Your value to the world isn't determined by how many people you can convince to follow you, or how loudly you can promote your ideas. Your value comes from developing yourself so completely, from accessing the shadow frequency so consistently, from integrating your nature so thoroughly that you become a natural reference point for others seeking the same transformation. People are naturally drawn to individuals who have resolved their internal conflicts and achieved authentic power. They sense something different about such people, though they can't always articulate what they're sensing. These individuals emit a frequency of calm confidence that feels magnetic to those ready for growth and threatening to those attached to dysfunction. Sarah discovered lighthouse consciousness after years of trying to help everyone around her change their lives. She had read every self-help book, attended every seminar, collected every technique. She became obsessed with convincing her friends and family to join her on the path of personal development. But the harder she tried to help others, the more they resisted her efforts. They began avoiding her calls, declining her invitations, making jokes about her guru phase. She felt frustrated and unappreciated, wondering why people couldn't see that she was trying to help them. Then she realized she was operating from lighthouse consciousness backwards. Instead of standing firmly in her own development and letting others come to her when they were ready, she was chasing after people who weren't asking for guidance. She stopped trying to convert others and started focusing entirely on her own transformation. She implemented the 5 practices with religious consistency. She worked with a coach to integrate her shadow aspects. She built a business based on her authentic gifts rather than what she thought would sell. Within 6 months, people began asking her what had changed. Friends who had previously resisted her advice started seeking her perspective. Clients began finding her through referrals from people she had never met. She had become a lighthouse, attracting the right people naturally rather than chasing after the wrong ones frantically. The lighthouse understands that its job isn't to save every ship. Its job is to provide reliable guidance for those who are seeking safe harbor. Some ships will ignore its warning and crash against the rocks. Others will sail safely past without acknowledging its assistance. But some will find their way to safety specifically because the lighthouse maintained its position and continued shining its light. This consciousness protects you from 2 toxic patterns that drain most people's energy: trying to save those who don't want to be saved, and dimming your light to make others comfortable with their darkness. When you embody lighthouse consciousness, you stop taking responsibility for other people's choices while taking complete responsibility for your own development. You stop trying to convince skeptics and start attracting believers. You stop lowering your standards to accommodate mediocrity and start raising your standards to attract excellence. The lighthouse doesn't apologize for its brightness. It doesn't tone down its signal to avoid offending ships that prefer to navigate in darkness. It understands that its greatest service is to maintain its own intensity and reliability, trusting that those who need guidance will find their way to its light. This can feel lonely at first, especially if you're accustomed to seeking validation from others or measuring your worth by how many people you can help. But lighthouse consciousness eventually attracts a higher quality of relationship than you've ever experienced. Instead of people who want you to fix them, you attract people who want to grow alongside you. Instead of relationships based on neediness, you create connections based on mutual respect and shared vision. The lighthouse stands alone, but is never truly alone. Ships depend on its guidance. Coastal communities rely on its protection. Other lighthouses maintain similar vigil along different stretches of coastline. It's part of a network of illumination that makes safe passage possible for all who respect the ocean's power. When you achieve lighthouse consciousness, you become part of a similar network. Other people who have done their inner work recognize you immediately. You begin attracting opportunities, relationships, and resources that align with your authentic nature rather than your conditioned personality. You stop trying to prove your worth to those who can't see it and start focusing on serving those who can. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable and start shining more brightly to attract those ready for transformation. The integration, sculptor, river, lighthouse. These three archetypes work together within your consciousness. The sculptor gives you patience with your own development and precision in removing what doesn't serve. The river gives you persistence in moving toward your objectives and flexibility in adapting to circumstances. The lighthouse gives you the confidence to stand firmly in your truth and the wisdom to let others come to you when they're ready. When someone criticizes your goals or questions your methods, the sculptor reminds you that masterpieces aren't created by committee. The river reminds you to flow around their resistance rather than fighting against it. The lighthouse reminds you that your job is to maintain your own light, not to force others to see by it. When you encounter obstacles that seem impossible to overcome, the sculptor reminds you that transformation is a gradual process requiring patience. The river reminds you that persistence will eventually find a way through or around any barrier. The lighthouse reminds you that maintaining your position and continuing to shine is the greatest service you can provide. When you feel tempted to abandon your path because results aren't coming fast enough, the sculptor reminds you that the masterpiece emerges one chisel stroke at a time. The river reminds you that the ocean is inevitable if you maintain your flow. The lighthouse reminds you that your consistency is what others depend on, even when they don't acknowledge it. These archetypes become the foundation of your new identity. Not something you pretend to be, but something you gradually become through consistent practice and patient development. They give you strength when others doubt you, clarity when circumstances confuse you, and peace when the world around you churns with chaos. You are the sculptor of your own consciousness, patiently removing everything that isn't aligned with your highest potential. You are the river of your own destiny, flowing consistently toward your inevitable success. You are the lighthouse of your own truth, standing firmly in your authentic power while guiding others who are ready for transformation. This is who you are becoming. This is who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning and compromise. This is the identity that allows natural access to the shadow frequency and effortless creation of extraordinary results. The question is no longer whether you can achieve what you desire. The question is whether you're ready to become who you must be to sustain it. In the deepest chambers of ancient temples, master practitioners understood a truth that escapes most seekers. The ultimate power lies not in action, but in the space between actions. Not in speaking, but in the pregnant silence before words. Not in striving, but in the profound stillness that exists at the center of all movement. You have learned to interrogate your shadow, to disrupt your conditioning, to flow like water and stand like stone. But now you must master the most sophisticated technique of all, the weaponization of silence and the transcendent power of detachment. This is where Napoleon Hill's dark trick reveals its most potent application. Where ordinary people see emptiness, masters see infinite potential. Where others experience boredom, you will discover the creative force that births all manifestation. Where they fear stillness, you will find your greatest strength, the architecture of silence. Silence isn't the absence of sound, it's the presence of pure potential. In the gap between your thoughts, in the pause between your heartbeats, in the space between stimulus and response, exists a field of consciousness so powerful that accessing it for even moments can reshape your entire reality. Most people fear silence because it reveals the chattering monkey mind that usually runs their lives. They fill every moment with noise, activity, stimulation, anything to avoid confronting the raw presence of their own awareness. They mistake the monkey mind's constant commentary for their authentic self. But you know better now. You've learned to distinguish between the voice of conditioning and the whisper of wisdom. You've developed the courage to face what exists beneath the surface noise. Now you must learn to weaponize that silence strategically. Begin each day with 15 minutes of intentional silence. Not meditation, not visualization, not any technique at all. Simply sit in complete stillness and allow whatever arises to arise without resistance or manipulation. Don't try to empty your mind. That's impossible and unnecessary. Instead, observe your mind's activity with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying an interesting specimen. In this silence, you'll discover something extraordinary. Your most brilliant insights don't come through thinking harder, but through thinking less. Your best solutions emerge not when you force them, but when you create space for them to appear naturally. Your deepest wisdom speaks not in words, but in knowings that arise from beyond the rational mind. Thomas, a hedge fund manager, who managed $800 million in assets, discovered the power of strategic silence during the 2008 financial crisis. While his competitors panicked and made reactive decisions based on fear and market noise, Thomas instituted a daily practice of sitting in complete silence before making any major trades. In those moments of stillness, he would sense patterns and possibilities that weren't visible to analytical thinking. He developed what seemed like supernatural timing, entering and exiting positions with precision that appeared almost psychic to his colleagues. By the end of 2008, while most funds had lost 30 to 40% of their value, Thomas's fund had gained 12%. The secret wasn't superior analysis or better information. It was his ability to access the shadow frequency through silence, to sense the deeper currents beneath market turbulence, to make decisions from intuitive wisdom rather than reactive fear. This same principle applies to every area of your life. Before responding to challenging emails, pause in silence and sense the response that serves your highest good. Before entering important conversations, create space for wisdom to inform your words. Before making significant decisions, allow stillness to reveal options that thinking alone cannot discover. Silence becomes your secret weapon in social situations as well. While others fill awkward pauses with nervous chatter, you remain comfortably quiet, allowing tension to build until others feel compelled to reveal more than they intended. While others argue their positions desperately, you remain silent until the perfect moment to speak, ensuring your words carry maximum impact. Learn to use strategic pauses in conversation, like a maestro conducting an orchestra. Your silence creates space for others to project their own meanings, fears, and desires onto your presence. They begin trying to fill your silence with information that serves your understanding of their real motivations and vulnerabilities. But silence's greatest power isn't social. It's creative. In the stillness between thoughts, you access the same field of infinite potential that mystics call the void and physicists call the quantum field. This is where new possibilities gestate before emerging into manifest reality. Your regular periods of intentional silence become laboratories for reality creation, not through forced visualization or desperate wanting, but through aligning your consciousness with the creative force that continuously births new worlds. In silence, you don't try to make things happen. You allow yourself to become the kind of person for whom your desired outcomes happen naturally. The art of sacred detachment. The highest level of power comes through caring deeply about your vision while remaining completely detached from specific outcomes. This paradox confuses most people, who believe that caring means clinging and that detachment means not caring. They oscillate between desperate attachment that creates anxiety and false detachment that breeds apathy. True detachment is something else entirely. It's caring so deeply about your highest good that you're willing to release your grip on how that good should manifest. It's trusting the process so completely that you don't need to control every detail of the results. Attachment creates resistance. When you desperately need a specific outcome, you generate an energy of lack that repels what you're trying to attract. When you demand that success look exactly like your mental picture, you close yourself off to opportunities that might be even better than what you imagined. Detachment creates flow. When you care about your vision but remain flexible about its expression, you open yourself to possibilities you couldn't have conceived through planning alone. When you trust the process more than your limited understanding, you allow life to orchestrate outcomes more elegant than anything your ego could design. Practice this by making your plans with total commitment while holding your expectations lightly. Work as hard as you can, Prepare as thoroughly as possible, then release your attachment to specific results and remain open to whatever emerges. When Rebecca launched her online course business, she was attached to a very specific vision of success. 10,000 students in the first year, featured articles in major publications, speaking engagements at prestigious conferences. She planned meticulously, worked 18-hour days and promoted relentlessly. But the results didn't match her expectations. After 6 months, she had only 300 students and no media attention. Her attachment to her specific vision was creating anxiety and desperation that potential customers could sense. She was trying so hard to force her predetermined outcome that she was missing opportunities right in front of her. Then she learned to practice sacred detachment. She maintained complete commitment to serving her students excellently while releasing her grip on how success should look. Instead of chasing media attention, she focused on creating value. Instead of targeting quantity, she cultivated quality relationships. Within a year, her small but passionate community had generated more revenue than her original plan projected. Several students had become business partners. Others had offered her consulting opportunities she never could have imagined. Her detached commitment had attracted outcomes far better than her attached planning. This principle applies to every desire you hold. Want wealth? Commit completely to creating value while remaining detached from how wealth arrives. Desire a relationship? Become the most attractive version of yourself while staying open to forms of connection you haven't considered. Seek recognition? Focus entirely on excellence while allowing acknowledgement to come in whatever form serves your highest good. Detachment doesn't mean you stop taking action or pursuing goals. It means you stop strangling your desires with desperate need. You care deeply enough to work diligently, but lightly enough to remain flexible. You commit fully to the process while surrendering control of the outcomes. This creates what Taoists call wu wei, effortless action. You find yourself working harder than ever while feeling less stressed than before. You pursue your objectives with intensity while maintaining inner peace. You care passionately about your vision while remaining emotionally free from specific results. The daily disciplines of transcendence. Masters understand that transcendence isn't a destination you reach, it's a daily practice you embody. Every morning offers a choice. Will you operate from your conditioned patterns or from your awakened awareness? Will you react from your programming or respond from your wisdom? Will you live from your fears or from your power? Establish these 4 non-negotiable daily practices that anchor your consciousness in transcendent awareness. Morning gratitude calibration. Before your feet touch the floor, identify 3 aspects of your current reality that you genuinely appreciate. Not because you should feel grateful, but because gratitude attunes your consciousness to abundance rather than scarcity. Gratitude practiced from authenticity rather than obligation becomes a frequency generator that attracts more experiences worthy of appreciation. Don't just list things mechanically. Feel the actual appreciation in your body. Let thankfulness become a physical sensation that permeates your cells and radiates from your presence. This isn't positive thinking, it's reality calibration. You're training your consciousness to notice what's working rather than obsessing over what's missing. Midday power. Pause. Sometime between noon and 2 p.m., regardless of what you're doing or where you are, take 60 seconds of complete stillness. Close your eyes if possible. Breathe deeply 3 times. Ask yourself, am I operating from my authentic power or from my conditioned reactions? If you've slipped into reactive mode, use this moment to consciously shift back to intentional awareness. This practice prevents the unconscious drift that causes most people to lose their center as the day progresses. It maintains your connection to the shadow frequency, regardless of external pressures or unexpected challenges. Evening integration review. Before sleep, mentally review the day's experiences through the lens of growth rather than judgment. Instead of criticizing yourself for mistakes, ask, what did this experience teach me about my patterns, my power, or my potential? Instead of celebrating successes with ego satisfaction, ask, How can I integrate this positive outcome to support my continued development? This practice transforms every experience into fuel for evolution. Failures become wisdom. Successes become stepping stones. Ordinary events become opportunities for deeper understanding. Weekly solitude immersion. Once per week, spend at least 2 hours in complete solitude without any external stimulation. No phone, no music, no books, no podcasts. Just you and your own consciousness. Walk in nature, sit in your room, drive in silence. The location doesn't matter. What matters is creating regular space for your deepest self to emerge without distraction. Most people fear this practice because they discover how addicted they are to external stimulation and how uncomfortable they've become with their own presence. But this discomfort is exactly what you need to transcend. In solitude, you remember who you are beneath all the roles you play and personas you maintain. These practices work cumulatively. The morning gratitude creates positive momentum. The midday pause maintains conscious direction. The evening review transforms experiences into wisdom. The weekly solitude deepens your connection to authentic self. Within 3 months of consistent practice, you'll notice that your default state has shifted. Instead of waking up neutral and having to work to feel good, you'll wake up aligned and have to be knocked off center by something significant. Instead of losing your power to external circumstances, you'll maintain your center even during chaos. People will begin commenting that something has changed about you, though they won't be able to identify exactly what. You'll seem more confident without being arrogant, more peaceful without being passive, more powerful without being aggressive. You'll have developed what ancient traditions called presence, a quality of being that influences everyone around you without effort. The master's secret, beyond technique. All the practices you've learned, all the principles you've absorbed, all the disciplines you've implemented are ultimately just preparation for this moment, the recognition that your true power has never existed in any technique or strategy. Your real power exists in who you are, not in what you do. Napoleon Hill's dark trick wasn't really a trick at all. It was the recognition that consciousness creates reality, that being precedes having, that internal transformation inevitably manifests as external change. All the successful people he interviewed had somehow accessed this truth, though most couldn't articulate how they'd done it. The techniques are training wheels, the practices are scaffolding, the disciplines are temporary structures that support your development until you no longer need them. Eventually, you internalize these principles so completely that they become automatic expressions of your evolved consciousness rather than effortful applications of learned strategies. You reach a point where you don't need to practice emotional disruption because you naturally generate the emotions that serve your objectives. You don't need to strategize conversational Aikido because you instinctively communicate in ways that create win-win outcomes. You don't need to force micro-decisions because you automatically choose what aligns with your authentic nature. This is mastery, when conscious choice becomes unconscious habit, when deliberate practice becomes natural expression, when strategic thinking becomes intuitive wisdom. Marcus Aurelius understood this when he wrote that we become what we repeatedly think about. James Clear touched on it when he emphasized identity-based change. Buddha pointed toward it when he taught that suffering comes from attachment to outcomes we can't control. But they were all describing the same fundamental truth. Sustainable transformation occurs not through changing what you do, but through evolving who you are. When your identity shifts at the deepest level, your behaviors, choices, and results shift automatically to match your new sense of self. This is why attempting to change results without changing consciousness always fails eventually. You can force temporary improvements through willpower and effort, but they won't last unless your identity evolves to support them. Lottery winners return to poverty because their inner wealth consciousness hasn't developed. People who lose weight through extreme dieting regain it because their inner identity hasn't shifted from overweight to naturally fit. But when consciousness transformation precedes external change, the results are permanent, because they arise naturally from your evolved sense of self rather than being forced through temporary effort. The choice that changes. Everything you stand now at the same crossroads that confronted every person who has ever achieved something extraordinary. Behind you lies the familiar world of limitation, excuse, and comfortable mediocrity. Before you lies the unknown territory of unlimited potential, complete responsibility, and uncomfortable growth. Most people choose familiarity. They prefer the known suffering of limitation to the unknown challenges of expansion. They remain trapped in cycles they understand, rather than risking growth they can't predict. They accept small, safe lives, rather than pursuing large, uncertain possibilities. But you're not most people. You wouldn't have read this far if you were satisfied with ordinary outcomes. Something inside you recognizes that you're capable of far more than your current results suggest. Something whispers that the techniques and principles you've learned aren't just interesting ideas but practical tools for fundamental transformation. The question isn't whether these methods work. The question is whether you'll work them. The question isn't whether transformation is possible. The question is whether you'll commit to the patient, persistent, sometimes uncomfortable process of actually transforming. You've learned to interrogate your shadow and integrate your darkness. You've practiced emotional disruption and conversational aikido. You've mastered micro-decisions and strategic energy allocation. You've embodied the sculptor's patience, the river's persistence, and the lighthouse's illumination. You've discovered the power of silence and the freedom of detachment. But all of this knowledge means nothing without implementation. All of this understanding produces nothing without application. All of this potential remains dormant without activation. The practices you've learned will work only if you work them. The principles you've absorbed will transform you only if you allow them to transform you. The consciousness you've glimpsed will become your reality only if you choose to operate from it consistently rather than occasionally. This choice must be made daily. Every morning when you wake up, you choose either evolution or repetition. Every moment when you face challenge, you choose either growth or comfort. Every interaction with another person, you choose either conscious response or automatic reaction. These choices, accumulated over weeks and months, create a compound effect that transforms not just your external circumstances, but your fundamental identity. You become someone who naturally produces extraordinary results rather than someone who occasionally experiences them through luck or temporary effort. You become someone who accesses the shadow frequency as naturally as breathing, who influences outcomes through presence rather than pressure, who creates value effortlessly because creation has become your natural expression. You become someone who no longer needs to study success because you have become success. Someone who no longer seeks power because you have discovered that true power was always within you, waiting to be awakened through conscious development and disciplined practice. The final integration. Remember Marcus from chapter 2, the man who tried every technique but never achieved the results he sought. He represents everyone who approaches transformation as a collection of strategies rather than a fundamental shift in consciousness. Marcus failed not because the techniques don't work, but because he applied them from his old consciousness rather than using them to develop new consciousness. He wanted external change without internal transformation. He sought results without evolution. He demanded outcomes without becoming the person capable of sustaining them. Don't make Marcus's mistake. Don't treat these teachings as another collection of techniques to add to your arsenal. Recognize them as invitations to fundamental transformation, as doorways to consciousness that operates according to entirely different principles than your current awareness. When you truly integrate these principles, when you embody them so completely that they become expressions of your authentic nature rather than strategies you apply, you'll discover something profound. You never needed to become successful because you already were successful. You just needed to remove everything that was covering up your natural state of power, clarity, and creative ability. The sculptor doesn't create David. David already exists within the marble. The sculptor simply removes everything that isn't David. Your authentic self, the one capable of accessing unlimited potential, already exists within you. These practices simply remove everything that isn't authentically you. Your fears, your limitations, your excuses, your conditioning, none of these are actually you. They're accumulated layers of protective mechanisms you developed to survive in a world that couldn't see your true nature. But they're not permanent. They're not you. They can be released, dissolved, transcended through patient practice and conscious choice. What remains when you remove everything that isn't authentically you is someone capable of creating results that seem impossible to ordinary consciousness. Someone who influences outcomes through being rather than doing. Someone who attracts opportunities, relationships, and resources that align with their highest potential. Someone who has learned to think like Napoleon Hill thought, to see like Carnegie saw, to create like Edison created, not through imitation, but through accessing the same consciousness that all great achievers have discovered within themselves. When you master this level of awareness, when you operate consistently from the shadow frequency, when you integrate all aspects of your nature in service of your highest vision, nothing and no one can shake you. External circumstances become interesting challenges rather than threatening obstacles. Other people's opinions become irrelevant data rather than sources of validation or rejection. You develop what the ancients called diamond consciousness, awareness so clear, so strong, so unshakable that it cuts through illusion and transforms everything it touches. You become someone who doesn't just achieve success, but who embodies success so completely that it radiates from your presence and influences everyone around you. This is your destiny. This is your potential. This is who you have always been beneath the layers of conditioning and compromise. The techniques you've learned are just the tools for removing those layers. The practices you've developed are just the methods for accessing what was always there. The choice is yours. The time is now. The power has always been within you. When you master these principles, when you embody this consciousness, when you access the shadow frequency consistently rather than occasionally, nothing and no one will be able to shake you from your center, distract you from your vision, or diminish your power. You will have become someone who doesn't just study success, but who is success. Someone who doesn't just want transformation, but who has transformed. Someone who doesn't just dream about extraordinary results, but who creates them naturally, effortlessly, inevitably. This is Napoleon Hill's ultimate secret. This is the dark trick that he whispered only to those ready to handle such responsibility. This is the consciousness that separates the masters from the masses, the creators from the consumers, the powerful from the powerless. And now it's yours.